The smoke moved faster than anyone expected. One moment, the hallway was clear enough to see the exit sign blinking at the far end. The floor vibrated beneath their boots. But the smoke came first. He was alone. Outside the apartment, the rescue dog felt the change instantly. His pace slowed. His head lifted. The air told him what the eyes could not. Danger was closing in. Firefighters shouted through radios filled with static. Retreat orders overlapped with warnings. The structure was becoming unstable. Every second inside now carried the risk of collapse. Then the dog stopped. Not because he was confused, not because he was afraid. As smoke poured into the apartment and flames crept closer down the corridor, the dog stepped in front of the child's shaking body. And in that moment, when escape was still possible for one, the dog made a choice. The situations and behaviors shown reflect the real dangers faced by firefighters and rescue dogs during emergencies. The fire had already erased the building's sense of direction. Smoke filled every corridor, turning familiar paths into dead ends. Exit signs flickered and disappeared behind thick black air that burned the lungs and stole visibility within seconds. Floors weakened. During evacuations, it only takes one wrong turn, one moment of hesitation, one door opened too late. Conditions no longer allowed safe human entry. The risk of collapse was rising fast, and every trained instinct warned them that staying longer could cost lives. That's when the rescue dog was brought forward. Rescue dogs are trained not just to search, but to assess to sense changes in air, sound, and structure that humans cannot detect. They move through smoke with purpose, guided by instinct sharpened through training and trust. What he found would place him at the center of a decision no command could make for him. Because sometimes, when escape is still possible, someone else needs protection first. And in the moments that followed, a single choice would define the outcome for everyone involved. The fire didn't arrive all at once. It crept. At first, it was only a smell sharp, bitter, unfamiliar. Then it became smoke, thin enough to ignore, thick enough to worry about. The apartment complex was old. Narrow hallways, low ceilings, layers of paint hiding decades of repairs. It wasn't designed for fire to move slowly. It was designed for fire to spread. Outside, firefighters arrived to a scene already unraveling. Smoke poured from upper floors, rising in heavy columns that turned the night sky dark. Residents crowded the street below, shouting names, pointing upward, desperate for answers no one had yet. Firefighters moved fast. Hoses were deployed. Ladders raised. Their voices vanished into smoke. Evacuation was chaotic. Some residents made it out through stairwells. Others retreated when flames blocked their path. Doors slammed. Alarms screamed. Confusion spread faster than fire. In the middle of it all, a child ran. He followed the crowd at first small feet, pounding against the floor, heart racing, lungs burning. Someone pushed past him. Someone shouted. The smoke thickened suddenly, swallowing the hallway ahead. The exit sign blinked once, then disappeared. The child turned the wrong way. But time felt different inside the smoke. Seconds stretched. Sounds distorted. Conditions worsening. The captain made the call quickly. Prepare to withdraw. We're reaching structural limits. No one argued. They hadn't found the child. They hadn't heard a voice. But staying meant risking more lives. Outside, the rescue dog arrived. He stepped down from the truck calmly, unfazed by the noise and chaos around him. His movements were deliberate, controlled. This was not confusion. This was purpose. The dog's ears lifted. His tail moved once. Inside the building, the dog immediately lowered his head, reading the smoke like a map. The handler nodded and gave the dog slack. The dog disappeared into smoke. Inside the corridor, the child's coughing grew weaker. His chest hurt, his vision blurred. He lifted his head weakly. Out of the smoke, a shape appeared. A dog. The dog approached slowly, lowering himself immediately, blocking falling ash and debris from reaching the child. His body was warm. The child froze, unsure if what he was seeing was real. The dog nudged his leg gently, then stayed still. Outside, the handler felt the lines stop moving. "He's stationary," he said. A deep crack echoed through the walls, followed by the sound every firefighter fears. Collapse had begun. Part of the wall caved inward, sending debris crashing down just feet away. The dog reacted instantly. He turned his body, placing himself between the child and the falling debris. He lowered his stance, muscles locked, becoming a barrier. "Get ready," he said. "We may lose the interior completely." Inside, smoke thickened further. Heat surged. The child's coughing turned into gasps. The dog pressed closer, lowering his head to shield the child's face. He nudged the child's chin upward, guiding him to the cleaner air near the floor. The child clutched the dog's vest, shaking. "He's protecting him," the handler said quietly. The captain looked back at the building, then at the handler. It collapsed in warnings. A crack that sounded like a gunshot. A tremor beneath the floor. A sudden drop of dust so thick it turned smoke into mud. Outside, firefighters stepped back instinctively as the structure shifted again. They watched the upper windows flex, and the doorway breathed smoke like it was alive. "Captain!" someone shouted. "We're losing internal support." The captain didn't answer immediately. Every second they waited increased the risk of losing more than a rescue. The handler knelt beside the line, hands tight in his gloves. The line was still, not slack, not pulling, still, and still meant the dog wasn't leaving. "He's holding position," the handler said quietly. "He's not abandoning the kid." The captain's jaw tightened. The handler nodded, but both men knew what they were really saying. If it went, they might lose the dog. Smoke turned the corridor into a tunnel with no edges. The only clear shapes were the child's trembling hands and the dog's solid body pressed in front of him. The child's breathing came in short, shallow pulls. His eyes watered constantly, unable to stop blinking. Dust puffed outward, momentarily choking the air even more. Firm, the child froze again, chest heaving. Somewhere in the smoke, the child heard yelling firefighters calling commands. But it felt far away, like it belonged to another world. He took one step, then coughed so hard he nearly collapsed. The dog reacted instantly, pressing his side against the child's hip to steady him. Another tremor shook the floor. Outside, the line twitched slightly. The handler's head snapped up. "He's moving," he said. "Slow." "Is he bringing the kid out?" The handler listened with his hands, feeling each vibration, each shift. "Yeah," he whispered. "He's guiding him." Inside, the dog moved one step forward, then stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because the corridor ahead had changed. A section of the ceiling had partially caved, creating a low barrier of debris. The dog could slip through. The child could not. The child stared at the pile, eyes wide. Fear returned in a rush. "I can't," he whispered. The dog barked again, urgent now. The child crouched, trying to crawl under. Smoke burned his lungs. His hands touched something hot, and he jerked back with a cry. The dog turned sideways, pressing his shoulder against the debris. He pushed, muscles straining, shifting the rubble just enough to widen the gap. But the gap widened, just enough. The child crawled forward, sobbing quietly, squeezing under the debris while the dog held it back with his weight. Inside, the corridor narrowed further. Smoke was thicker now. A second later, debris crashed down where the child would have run. The child froze, shaking. The dog didn't move. But the route they had come from was no longer stable. For the dog, it was a possibility. He pulled the child toward it. The maintenance corridor was low. The child had to crouch to follow. Pipes rattled overhead as the building trembled again. Water dripped from a broken line, hissing as it hit hot surfaces. Each time the child stumbled, the dog pressed against him, steadying him. Outside, the line moved steadily now. Then the worst sound of all came. A deep, rolling groan. Not a crack, not a warning. The sound of a building deciding it had had enough. Not yanking, guiding, urgent. Inside, the dog felt the tension on the line. He responded instantly, pulling the child faster. A door, metal. The door burst open into a side stairwell, narrow, smoky, but leading down. They had a path. The dog pulled the child forward. The handler's eyes widened. "They're at the exit," he said. "They're right there." Firefighters rushed forward, and then they appeared. First the dog stood covered, eyes wide, determined. Then the child dirty, terrified, shaking, barely standing. Hands reached in. Firefighters grabbed the child and pulled him out, lifting him into clean air. The dog stumbled out behind him, and in that same moment, the building collapsed. A roar of debris and flame erupted behind them as the side stairwell buckled and the structure folded inward. Firefighters stumbled backward, shielding their faces as heat and dust blasted outward. "You both made it." The dog's eyes didn't close. They stayed fixed on the child. Only when the child's oxygen mask was secured, only when his breathing steadied, did the dog finally let his body relax. Because he hadn't just found the child. He had brought him out, through collapse, through smoke, through fear. And the rescue was far from over, but the hardest part had been won. The child collapsed to his knees as soon as he crossed the threshold, coughing violently, chest heaving as if he had forgotten how to breathe without fire pressing down on him. Firefighters surrounded him instantly. An oxygen mask was pressed gently to his face. His legs trembled. One boot was gone, torn away somewhere inside the collapsing structure. The handler was at his side instantly. His eyes were half open, unfocused but alive. Only then did the dog's body relax. Firefighters stepped back as the building behind them finally surrendered. A thunderous crash echoed through the street as floors pancaked and walls folded inward. Flames burst upward through the collapsing structure, followed by a massive cloud of dust and smoke that forced everyone to retreat. If they had been seconds slower, no one said it. They didn't need to. And it had worked. Medics moved with urgency but calm precision. The child was lifted onto a stretcher, secured carefully, oxygen maintained. A paramedic leaned close, speaking softly. The child tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse whisper. "The dog," he said. "Is the dog okay?" The paramedic glanced toward the handler and the dog, then smiled gently. "He's right here," she said. "He stayed with you." The child closed his eyes, relief washing over his soot-streaked face. The dog was lifted onto a K9 stretcher moments later. The handler walked beside him, one hand never leaving the dog's shoulder. Oxygen was placed over his muzzle, and his breathing slowly began to even out. "You're done," the handler whispered. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. They were loaded into separate vehicles, the child into an ambulance, the dog into a veterinary transport unit. Sirens cut through the night again, but this time they sounded different. Ash drifted through the air like snow. A firefighter broke the silence. "He didn't just find him," he said quietly. "He guided him out." The captain nodded slowly. "He made the choice," he replied, "and he didn't break." At the hospital, the child was rushed into treatment. Doctors worked quickly to assess smoke inhalation, dehydration, minor burns from falling debris. The worst injuries were internal lungs irritated, throat inflamed, but none were life-threatening. "He's going to recover," a doctor said after a long examination. "It will take time, but he's going to be okay." The words hit like relief, crashing down all at once. The handler sat beside the dog's bed, exhaustion finally creeping in now that the danger had passed. "You hear that?" he murmured. "You're going to be fine." The dog's eyes opened briefly. He looked at the handler. Then he slept. The child nodded. "He didn't leave me," he said again, as if repeating it helped him understand what had happened. The city would wake up soon. News cameras would arrive. People would talk about the fire, about the collapse, about how close it had come to tragedy. And that choice had changed everything. The hospital was quiet in a way the street had not been. No sirens, no shouting, no collapsing walls. Every breath still burned a little, but it no longer felt like fire. The oxygen mask rested lightly against his face now, no longer urgent, just supportive. A nurse adjusted the four gently. "You're doing really well," she said. "Your lungs are clearing." The child nodded, then asked the same question he had asked every hour since he woke up. "Is the dog okay?" She smiled. "Yes, he's resting." That answer always helped. Down the hall, behind a door marked veterinary care, the rescue dog lay on a padded bed. Bandages wrapped his paws. His fur had been cleaned, but faint traces of smoke still lingered. And 4 delivered fluids slowly, and a small oxygen line rested near his muzzle. The handler sat beside him, unmoving. He hadn't slept. He hadn't left. Every time the dog's chest rose and fell, the handler felt himself breathe again. The veterinarian entered quietly, reviewing charts. "His lungs took a hit," she said. "Smoke inhalation, mild burns, exhaustion. But he's stable." The handler nodded. "Most dogs would have panicked," she continued. "Most would have tried to escape." The handler looked down at the dog. "He wasn't going to leave," he said quietly. "Not without the kid." The veterinarian didn't argue. Outside the hospital, the city began to move again. Morning traffic returned. People walked past news vans, parked near the burned-out side of the building, glancing at the rubble with brief curiosity before continuing on with their day. The story spread quickly. A fire, a collapse, a child rescued at the last second. What most people didn't hear, what never fit neatly into headlines, was what happened inside the smoke. The stillness, the waiting, the decision to stay. At the firehouse, firefighters gathered in the kitchen between calls. Coffee sat untouched. Conversations were quieter than usual. "You see the vest?" One firefighter asked. "Yeah," another replied. "They're keeping it." The burned vest had been removed carefully and hung inside a glass cabinet near the entrance, not as a trophy, as a reminder. No plaque explained it. None was needed. At the hospital, the child's mother arrived later that morning. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands trembling as she reached for her son. She sat beside him, brushing his hair back gently. "You scared me," she whispered. The child swallowed. "I couldn't find the exit," he said. "And then he came." She looked up. "The dog?" He nodded. "He didn't run," the child said again. "He stayed with me." The words settled heavily between them. Later that afternoon, the handler received permission for a brief visit. He guided the dog, still weak but alert, down the hallway on a short leash. The dog's steps were slow, careful, but purposeful. His ears lifted as they approached the child's room. He stopped at the doorway. Inside, the child's eyes widened. "That's him," he whispered. The handler knelt and let the dog lie down beside the bed. The child reached out slowly, touching the dog's fur as if afraid the moment might vanish. "Thank you," the child said softly. The dog's tail moved once. That was enough. The mother covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "You saved my son," she said to the handler. The handler shook his head gently. "He saved himself," he replied. "We just helped. Recovery took time." The child stayed in the hospital for several days, then moved to outpatient care. His breathing improved. His strength returned. Nightmares came and went, fading slowly as fear gave way to memory. The dog recovered too. Bandages came off one by one. Burns healed. His breathing steadied. He began to wag his tail more, to lift his head when footsteps passed, to watch doors like he always had. Still working, still alert, but something had changed. The handler noticed it first. The dog paused longer at doorways now. He listened more carefully. He positioned himself instinctively between people and danger without being told, not fear. Awareness. Weeks later, the dog returned to the firehouse for light duty. Firefighters greeted him quietly, respectfully. Some knelt to scratch his ears. Others just nodded as he passed. The burned vest remained in the case. The handler watched the dog pause briefly in front of it, then move on. Months later, the child visited the firehouse. He was stronger now, taller, braver. He walked in holding his mother's hand, eyes scanning the unfamiliar space until they found what they were looking for. The dog lifted his head. The child smiled. They met in the center of the room, and the child wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. The dog stayed still, just like before. "Thank you," the child whispered again. Firefighters turned away, giving them space. The handler watched quietly. That was when he understood something he hadn't allowed himself to think before. The rescue wasn't over when they left the building. It continued in memory, in recovery, in the quiet moments that followed. Years later, the dog would retire. His steps would slow. His muzzle would gray. His days would become simpler short walks. Warm sunlight, the steady presence of the handler who had never left his side. And when the dog was gone, the handler would return to the firehouse alone. The glass case would still be there. The vest would still hang inside. And beneath it, in simple lettering, the words that said everything. He stayed. Because when smoke erased the exit and the building began to fail, when fear made running the easy choice, one dog chose to stand still, and that choice became a shield. Time moved forward, the way it always does. The burned lot where the building once stood was eventually cleared. Fences went up, signs appeared, plans were announced. Soon, something new would rise their clean walls, strong foundations, a fresh beginning built over what had been lost. That was how cities healed. But for the child, the place would always exist as it had been that night, not as rubble, not as fire, but as the moment when he thought he would disappear, and the moment when he didn't. As weeks turned into months, the child's life slowly returned to normal. School resumed. Laughter came back, hesitant at first, then stronger. The smell of smoke still made his chest tighten sometimes, and loud noises could send his heart racing, but he learned to breathe through it. When people asked what he remembered most about the fire, he never spoke about the flames. He spoke about the dog. "He stood in front of me," the child would say. "He didn't leave." That sentence followed him. It became a way of understanding what had happened, not just to him, but to the people who had risked everything to bring him out. At the firehouse, the story settled into the walls. New firefighters heard it during training. Veterans referenced it quietly during late-night shifts. It wasn't told as a legend or a boast, but as a reminder of the kind of trust the job demanded. The burned vest remained inside its glass case. No dates, no long explanation. Just a simple line beneath it. He stayed. The dog returned to work for a time, though never in the same way. He was older now, slower. His paws bore faint scars that reminded him, and everyone else, of how close he had come to the edge. The handler watched him carefully, never pushing, never rushing. There was no need. The dog had already given everything that mattered. On quiet days, the handler would take him on slow walks near the station. The dog still watched doorways, still positioned himself between people, and perceived danger without being told, still protecting. One afternoon, the handler sat beside him on the station steps as the sun dipped low, painting the street in soft orange light. "You know," the handler said quietly, "you didn't have to do that." The dog lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. "You could have run," the handler continued. "Everyone would have understood." The dog didn't move, because running had never been the point. Years passed. The child grew taller, stronger, braver. He carried the memory with him, not as fear, but as proof that when the world felt like it was collapsing, someone had chosen to stand between him and harm. That knowledge shaped him. It made him kinder, more aware, more willing to protect others when he could. The dog eventually retired. No sirens marked the day. No ceremony filled the station. Just quiet hands on his head, soft words. A final walk through the place that had been his second home. The handler took him home. Their days became simple sunlight through windows, slow walks, long naps, shared silence that didn't need words. And when the dog was gone, the handler felt the absence like a space that would never quite close. He returned to the firehouse weeks later. The glass case was still there. The vest still hung inside. Firefighters passed it every day, some pausing, some not, but everyone knew. The handler stood there longer than most, not because of pride, because of gratitude. This story is a fictional narrative inspired by real rescue dogs and firefighters who work every day in conditions where escape is not guaranteed and choices must be made in seconds. It is not about one dog. It is about all of them. About the ones trained to move forward when humans must stop. About the ones who read danger in the air. About the ones who understand that sometimes protection matters more than survival. Because heroism is not always loud. It does not always come with applause. Sometimes it is quiet, instinctive, still. Sometimes when the building starts to collapse and fear says run, a hero chooses to stay. And sometimes that hero has 4 legs.